"There's a camera in your office," whispered the black maid. Mafia boss exposed his fiancée. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Emma Walker's hands trembled as she wiped down the polished mahogany desk in the luxurious office of Mr. Edward Collins. She had been cleaning this office for 3 months now and had become an expert in blending into the background. Mr. Collins, a man of power, wealth, and influence, rarely took notice of the staff. Emma had learned quickly to avoid drawing attention to herself, her presence always silent and unnoticed, just as she preferred it. But today was different. Today, something caught her eye, something that made her pause for a moment, her heart racing. As she moved the leather chair to one side, she saw a small blinking light from the corner of the room, behind a stack of documents on the desk. Her curiosity piqued. Emma stepped closer. It was a camera. A hidden camera, partially obscured but unmistakable. She felt a rush of unease flood through her. Emma had always known that Mr. Collins's world was one of secrets and hidden truths, but to find something like this in his private office was unsettling. She glanced around quickly, ensuring no one was watching. She knew it was risky, but she couldn't resist the urge to investigate. Carefully, she reached for the camera, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. As her hand made contact, a voice in her head told her to leave it alone, but she couldn't. Emma's pulse quickened as she realized that the camera was pointed directly at a specific corner of the office, where Mr. Collins's fiancée, Claire Adams, often met with him. Something didn't sit right with her. She had seen the two of them together countless times, but the hidden camera made her question everything. Why would Mr. Collins feel the need to monitor his fiancée? What was she hiding? Emma took a deep breath and backed away from the desk, carefully slipping the camera back into place. Her mind was racing with questions. She knew she couldn't ignore what she had just discovered, but what should she do with this information? The more she thought about it, the more she felt a growing sense of responsibility. This wasn't just some trivial matter. This was something far bigger. As she turned to leave the office, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. She had stumbled onto something far darker than she had ever imagined, and now there was no turning back. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the hidden camera as she walked back to the staff quarters. It was all she could focus on. How it had been placed so carefully, its lens aimed at a corner of the office where Claire Adams often visited. She tried to shake off the growing unease, but the thought gnawed at her. Why would Edward Collins, the powerful mafia boss who ran a network of influential people, need to spy on his fiancée? Was he hiding something? Or was she? Emma paced back and forth in her tiny room, trying to make sense of the situation. She knew it wasn't her place to get involved in the personal matters of her employer, but the camera made it impossible for her to simply ignore it. She had worked for Mr. Collins long enough to understand that his world was one of secrecy, but this felt different. It felt wrong. The next morning, as Emma cleaned the hallways of the mansion, her mind kept returning to that camera. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right between Edward and Claire. The way they interacted in public was always cordial, but Emma had witnessed enough subtle glances and overheard enough conversations to know that things weren't perfect. Claire, with her polished charm and expensive taste, seemed to have a hidden agenda. Emma knew she couldn't just let the situation go. If Mr. Collins was being deceived by someone he trusted, it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. But how could she confront him? How could she even bring it up without sounding like a paranoid employee? She decided to keep quiet for now, but the thought of that camera kept lingering in the back of her mind. As the days passed, Emma continued her duties, all the while watching Claire more closely. She noticed the small, almost imperceptible signs, how Claire always seemed to be on her phone, texting in hushed tones, or how her interactions with Edward were always too perfect, almost rehearsed. Emma knew she had to do something. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, she overheard a conversation in the hallway. It was Claire, speaking to someone on the phone. Emma couldn't make out the words, but the tone of Claire's voice was unmistakable. It was tense, as if she were arguing with someone. Emma's heart began to race. She couldn't resist. She approached the door, just enough to listen in. "You need to be careful," Claire said, her voice low and sharp. "I don't care how much he trusts me. We can't let him find out. Not yet. Not until everything is in place." Emma's stomach churned. She quickly stepped away from the door, retreating into the shadows of the hallway. She couldn't believe what she had just overheard. There it was, the confirmation that something was off. But what did it mean? Who was Claire talking to? And what exactly was she hiding? Emma knew she had to act. She couldn't sit idly by and let Edward continue to be deceived. But she also knew that exposing Claire's secrets would come with consequences. If she was wrong, she could lose her job, or worse. Still, the feeling of responsibility weighed heavily on her. She couldn't let Edward's trust be broken by someone so deceitful. Emma had made up her mind. She would confront him. She didn't know how, but she would. The next day, she prepared herself for the hardest conversation of her life. She could already feel the weight of what was about to happen. She had to tell him the truth, whether he was ready for it or not. Emma spent the entire night turning over the idea of confronting Edward. She had prepared herself for this moment, or so she thought. But now, standing in front of the mansion's grand front doors, she wasn't sure if she was ready to take that first step. What if she was wrong? What if Claire was just playing a role, and Emma had misread everything? But deep down, Emma knew she had to act. She couldn't ignore the feeling that had taken root inside her since she discovered the camera. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, no matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise. She knew too much now. She couldn't walk away from it. As she walked through the long hallways of the mansion, Emma's heart raced. The walls, covered in portraits of the Collins family's long legacy, seemed to watch her as she passed. It was as if the house itself knew what she was about to do, and was holding its breath. She approached Edward's office, her footsteps quiet on the marble floors. She had rehearsed what she was going to say, but now the words seemed to slip away from her. She knocked softly on the door. There was a brief silence, followed by Edward's deep voice calling from within. "Come in." Emma took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Edward was sitting behind his desk, his back to her as he looked over some papers. He didn't turn when she entered, and for a moment, Emma felt invisible again, like she had for the past 3 months. But today was different. Today, she had to speak. "Mr. Collins, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. Edward didn't look up, but his voice softened. "What is it, Emma?" he asked, his tone unusually kind. He must have noticed the seriousness in her voice, because he finally turned to face her. His eyes met hers, and Emma felt a chill run down her spine. He was a powerful man, used to being in control of everything around him. And in that moment, Emma realized that it would take everything in her to shake him from his comfortable, unshakable world. I found something in your office," Emma began, trying to keep her voice calm. "A camera. It was hidden. I don't know why, but it's pointed at the place where you meet with Claire." Edward's expression remained unreadable, but Emma could see the tension in his jaw. "What do you mean, a camera?" he asked, his voice sharp now. Emma's heart skipped a beat, but she pressed on. "It's hidden behind some papers, but I saw it. I'm not sure why it's there, but I thought you should know." Edward's eyes narrowed, his mind working behind those cold, calculating eyes. Emma could see that he was trying to process her words, trying to make sense of the information she had just given him. "And you didn't mention this to anyone else?" he asked, his voice calm, but with a hint of suspicion. "No, sir," Emma replied. "I wanted to tell you first. I didn't know what to do with the information." Edward leaned back in his chair, his hands folding in front of him as he studied her. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice low and serious. "I'll look into it." There was a long pause, and Emma felt the weight of the silence pressing in on her. She had told him the truth, but now she had to wait. She had no idea what would happen next. "Is there anything else you need to tell me?" Edward asked after a moment, his eyes still on her. Emma shook her head, though a part of her wanted to ask him about Claire, about the conversation she had overheard. But she knew she couldn't ask that now. "Not yet." "No, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," Edward said, standing up from his desk. "You can go now, Emma. I'll take care of this." Emma nodded, her legs feeling weak as she turned to leave. She had done what she had to do. Now, all she could do was wait and hope that Edward would take her warning seriously. As she walked back down the hallway, she felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. She had exposed a secret, but the future was still unclear. What would happen next? Would Edward confront Claire? Or would he simply dismiss her concerns? Emma didn't know, but she couldn't help feeling that things were about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. The next few days were a blur for Emma. She carried on with her usual duties, cleaning the mansion's rooms and hallways, but her mind was constantly on Edward's response. He had taken her warning seriously, but what did that mean? She couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Edward hadn't mentioned the camera again, and Claire had been quiet, as if unaware that her secrets had been exposed. Emma had no idea what was happening behind the scenes, but she knew it wouldn't be long before the truth came out. One afternoon, as Emma was dusting the library, she overheard Edward's voice in the hallway. He was speaking on the phone, his tone sharp and serious. Emma paused, careful not to make a sound. She could hear Claire's name being mentioned, and she instinctively leaned closer to the door to listen. "Yes, I know." Edward's voice was low but full of tension. "I'll handle it. Don't worry about her. We'll deal with this situation tonight." Emma's heart skipped a beat. He was talking about Claire. What was going to happen tonight? What did he mean by deal with this situation? Emma couldn't stand it any longer. She had to know more. She waited a moment before leaving the library and heading down the hall to find out what was going on. As she rounded the corner, she saw Edward walking toward her, his face tense and unreadable. He didn't seem to notice her at first, but when he did, he stopped and gave her a nod. "Emma," he said, his voice tight. "I'm going to need you to do something for me." Emma's pulse quickened. She hadn't expected this. "Of course, Mr. Collins," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do you need?" Edward hesitated for a moment, his gaze lingering on her before he spoke. "I need you to be discreet. There's something going on with Claire. I can't explain it now, but I trust you. I need you to make sure everything is in order for tonight's dinner. I'm expecting a few important people, and I need everything to run smoothly. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, her mind racing. "Yes, Mr. Collins. I'll take care of everything." She had no idea what was going on, but she could feel the tension in the air. Something was happening between Edward and Claire, and it was clear that it was more than just a misunderstanding. As Emma prepared for the evening, she couldn't help but wonder what was coming next. The mansion was buzzing with activity as the staff prepared for the dinner. Edward had been unusually distant, but Emma could feel his presence looming over everything. It was as if the entire household was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As she set the table, she glanced over at Edward, who was speaking to one of his associates in the corner. He looked calm on the outside, but Emma could see the tightness in his jaw, the way his fists clenched when he thought no one was looking. He was clearly preparing for something. Emma finished setting the last few plates and stood back, her eyes scanning the room. She knew something was going to happen tonight, but she didn't know what. She didn't know how, but Emma could feel it in her gut. As the guests began to arrive, she watched Edward greet them with his usual charm, but the tension in the room was palpable. The night went on, and Emma found herself constantly glancing at Edward, trying to gauge his mood. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the edge of something, that everything was about to change. The dinner was nearing its end when Claire finally arrived. She entered the room with her usual poise, but Emma could see something different in her demeanor. Claire's smile seemed forced, and there was a nervousness in her eyes that Emma hadn't noticed before. It was as if she knew that the night was about to unravel. As the evening wore on, Emma kept her distance, but she couldn't help but notice the subtle interactions between Edward and Claire. There was something off, something unspoken between them. It was clear that whatever had been building up was finally reaching its breaking point. And when it happened quickly. Claire excused herself from the table, and moments later, Emma heard a heated argument coming from the hallway. She didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. Claire's secret had been exposed, and the fallout was inevitable. Emma stayed in the background, unsure of what to do next. She had done her part, but now it was up to Edward to decide how this would end. The night had come to a head, and Emma knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As the dinner came to an abrupt end, Emma continued her duties, quietly clearing the plates and glasses, trying her best to remain unseen. Her mind was still racing, her thoughts wrapped around the argument she had overheard in the hallway. She had seen the tension between Edward and Claire, but hearing their voices rise to a level of anger she had never witnessed made it real. The calm facade they both wore had shattered, revealing the cracks in their relationship. Emma could feel the weight of what had transpired that night. Everything she had witnessed, all the little details she had collected, had led to this. But she couldn't ignore the fear that lingered in the air. She had no idea what the fallout would be. Would Edward confront Claire? Would Claire confess to whatever secret she had been hiding? Emma didn't know, but she could feel the change. It wasn't just the mood of the dinner. It was the entire atmosphere of the mansion. She could tell things were no longer the same. As the guests began to leave, Emma made her way to the staff quarters, her hands shaking with anticipation. She tried to focus on her work, but the questions kept swirling in her mind. How would Edward handle the situation? Would he be as ruthless as everyone said he was, or would he show some sign of vulnerability? The next morning, Emma woke up early, determined to continue her work as usual. She couldn't allow herself to be consumed by the chaos that had unfolded the night before. But as she passed the office on her way to the kitchen, she saw Edward standing in the doorway. His expression was hard to read, as it usually was, but today it seemed colder, more distant. He barely acknowledged her as she passed, and that only deepened Emma's unease. She couldn't ignore the fact that something had shifted, not just in Edward's demeanor, but in the entire household. The staff moved with a quiet intensity that she hadn't noticed before. It was as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Emma tried to focus on her work, but the tension in the air was palpable. By the time the sun had set, Emma could feel it, the building pressure that had been growing for days. She had caught glimpses of Claire, who had been more withdrawn than usual, her eyes darting nervously whenever she thought no one was looking. It was clear she knew that her secrets were no longer safe. That evening, as Emma was cleaning the hallway, she saw Edward standing outside the library. He was speaking with one of his associates in hushed tones. Emma tried to move quietly, but Edward must have heard her footsteps because he turned to face her. His eyes were intense, his jaw tight. For a moment, there was only silence between them, and Emma felt as though she were being scrutinized. "Emma," Edward said finally, his voice low and controlled. "I need you to be prepared for something. Claire is going to leave tonight. This situation can no longer be ignored." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Leave? What did that mean?" "You've done well, Emma," he continued. "I trust you. But this will be handled privately. I need you to keep everything in order here while I take care of the rest." His words felt like a dismissal, but Emma knew he was asking for something more than just obedience. He was asking for loyalty, for silence. As he turned away and walked down the hallway, Emma was left standing in the quiet, her mind racing with questions. What did Edward mean by handling things privately? Was he going to confront Claire? And if he did, what would happen to her? Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something much bigger than herself. She had played a part in exposing a secret, but now it seemed as though the truth was unraveling in a way no one could control. The house felt like a pressure cooker, and Emma was right in the middle of it. She had done what she could, but she wasn't sure if the consequences were something she could escape. She wasn't sure if anyone could. As the night wore on, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that everything was on the verge of unraveling. The mansion, usually filled with the soft hum of activity, now felt eerily quiet. The staff moved with a sense of purpose, but there was an undercurrent of tension, a kind of unspoken anxiety hanging in the air. Edward's words echoed in Emma's mind. Claire is going to leave tonight. This situation can no longer be ignored. What exactly did he mean? And how would it all play out? Emma had seen the way Claire's demeanor had shifted, the way her confidence had cracked in the last few days. She was no longer the poised, untouchable woman she had been when she first arrived at the mansion. Now, she seemed fragile, nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. Emma had always known that Claire had secrets, but what were they? As the clock ticked past midnight, Emma stood by the large window in the staff quarters, watching the rain fall. Outside, her thoughts swirling. She had never imagined her life would intersect with the world of Edward Collins, a man who seemed to have it all, yet was clearly entangled in his own web of lies and deceit. The power, the money, the mansion, it all seemed to pale in comparison to the mess of secrets that surrounded him. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside the mansion, both growing more intense by the hour. As Emma turned away from the window, she was startled by the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to find Edward standing in the doorway, his face as unreadable as ever. "Emma," he said, his voice low and controlled. "We need to talk." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting this moment, but now that it had arrived, she wasn't sure what to say. "Yes, Mr. Collins?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's about Claire," Edward said, stepping into the room. "I've made my decision." Emma's pulse quickened. She had no idea what he meant by that, but she could tell from the way he spoke that things were about to change. "What will happen to her?" Emma asked, unable to stop the question from slipping out. Edward's eyes softened for a moment, but then he seemed to steel himself. "It's not going to be easy for her, Emma. But I've learned the hard way that sometimes the truth must come out, no matter how much it hurts." Emma nodded, unsure of how to respond. She had seen the way Edward had struggled with his feelings for Claire, the way he had tried to hold on to a relationship that was clearly falling apart. But now it seemed like the truth was unavoidable. Edward stood silently for a moment, his gaze distant, as if lost in thought. Then he turned to face Emma, his expression resolute. "I need you to handle the arrangements, Emma. Make sure everything is in place for tomorrow. It's going to be a long road ahead, and I need someone I can trust to help me manage things." Emma swallowed, her mind racing. She had never been more uncertain about what the future held, but she knew that this was a turning point, not just for Edward and Claire, but for herself as well. She had played a part in exposing the truth, and now she had to live with the consequences. "Of course, Mr. Collins," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "I'll take care of it." Edward gave her a sharp nod before turning and walking out of the room, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. She knew that whatever came next, she would be in the middle of it. She had seen the truth, and now she was part of the story, a story that was far from over. As the night stretched on, Emma couldn't help but feel that things were about to spiral out of control. But there was no turning back now. She had stepped into this world, and now she had to face whatever came next. And as the storm raged outside, Emma knew that her life, along with Edward's, would never be the same again. The next morning, the mansion felt quieter than ever. The usual hustle and bustle of staff preparing for the day had been replaced by an uneasy silence. Emma had never seen the house so still. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the storm to break. She had completed her morning chores and was now waiting, as instructed, for Edward to give her further instructions. She had the uneasy feeling that something big was about to happen. When she saw Edward enter the kitchen, his usual controlled demeanor was gone. His face was tight with a mixture of emotions that Emma couldn't quite place. He looked every bit the powerful man he was, but there was something different in the way he carried himself. "Emma," he said, his voice low but firm, "I need you to meet me in my office. It's time to take care of things." Emma's stomach turned. She knew what this meant. The situation had escalated, and whatever was about to happen, it would change everything. She followed Edward down the long hallway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. As they entered the office, Emma could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Edward walked to his desk, his back to her, and stood there for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "I'm going to confront Claire," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's over. This charade ends today." Emma nodded, though a part of her wanted to ask more questions. Wanted to know what had happened between Edward and Claire that had led to this point. But she knew better than to pry. "I need you to be ready," Edward continued, turning to face her. "I've already taken care of the arrangements for Claire's departure, but I need you to handle things here. I trust you, Emma. Can I count on you to keep everything running smoothly?" Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. She had no idea what the consequences would be, but she knew one thing for sure. She was in this now. "Of course, Mr. Collins. I'll take care of it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that was beginning to settle in her chest. Edward gave her a sharp nod, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of hesitation. But Emma didn't falter. She couldn't. She had made it this far, and now there was no turning back. "Good," Edward said, turning toward the door. "Stay here. I'll deal with the rest." Emma remained where she was, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't contain. She knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever happened next, she would be there, at the center of it all. She had already exposed one secret, but now there was more at stake. Claire was leaving, but would she go quietly? And what would Edward do once the truth was fully out? Emma didn't know, but she couldn't stop wondering what kind of world she had stepped into. She had been drawn into the chaos of Edward's life, a life filled with secrets and power, and now there was no way out. She could only hope that she was ready for whatever came next. As she waited in the quiet office, Emma thought about everything that had led to this moment. The camera, the whispers, the secrets. She had no idea what Edward's next move would be, but she knew it would change everything. And as the minutes ticked by, Emma steeled herself for the storm that was about to break. As the door to Edward's office closed behind him, Emma was left alone in the dimly lit room, her mind swirling with thoughts. She hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly, but here she was, standing in the middle of a storm that was no longer just swirling around Edward and Claire, it was pulling her in too. She glanced at the polished desk in front of her, the very desk where so many decisions had been made, both visible and invisible. It was all happening so fast, and Emma couldn't quite process it. She could hear voices down the hall, the faint sounds of Claire arguing with someone. The tension in the house was unbearable. Emma knew she needed to prepare for whatever was coming next, but she couldn't shake the feeling that things had already spiraled beyond anyone's control. She stood by the window, gazing out at the quiet garden below. The mansion, normally a symbol of wealth and power, now felt like a gilded cage. She thought about how little she had known about the world she had entered. A few months ago, she was just a woman trying to make a living. Now, she was at the center of a drama that seemed as vast and dangerous as the empire Edward had built. She had uncovered a secret, but she had no idea just how much it would cost her to be involved in the aftermath. As Emma turned away from the window, she heard footsteps coming down the hallway, and this time, they weren't Edward's. She froze, her pulse quickening. A familiar figure appeared in the doorway, Claire. The woman who had once seemed so untouchable, so confident in her role as Edward's fiancée, now looked different. Her eyes were red, her face pale, and there was a look of defeat in her posture. She stepped into the room slowly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Emma," Claire said, her voice shaky. "I know you've seen something. You don't have to pretend like everything is fine." Emma stared at her, unsure of how to respond. She had seen enough to understand that Claire was not the woman she had first assumed. I don't know what you mean," Emma said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Claire let out a sigh, as if she had already expected that answer. "You've seen the camera," she said, her voice growing steadier. "You've seen the lies. You know what Edward is like. I don't have to tell you, do I?" Emma felt a strange pang in her chest. She had never expected Claire to be so vulnerable. She had always thought of her as the enemy, the one who had something to hide, but now, standing before her, she could see the cracks in Claire's armor. "Why did you do it?" Emma asked softly, unable to stop herself. "Why all the secrets?" Claire took a step closer, her eyes searching Emma's face. "Because sometimes you do what you have to do to survive," she said quietly. "Edward, he's not the man you think he is. He's ruthless. He doesn't care about anyone but himself. I didn't have a choice. I had to make my own path." Emma felt the weight of those words, and for the first time, she saw Claire not as an enemy, but as someone who was just as trapped in this world as she was. Claire wasn't the villain Emma had imagined. She was a woman fighting for her own survival, just like Emma had been. The room fell silent, the tension still thick in the air. Emma didn't know what to say next. Part of her wanted to comfort Claire, to tell her it would be okay, but she knew better. The reality of the situation was far more complicated than that. Claire was about to leave, and Edward was preparing to confront her. There was no turning back. "I don't know what's going to happen," Claire said, her voice breaking slightly. "But I have to go. I can't stay in this house any longer. It's over." Emma nodded, feeling the finality of her words. She had always known that things couldn't stay the same forever, but hearing it from Claire made it all the more real. As Claire turned to leave, Emma called out to her. "Be careful," she said softly. Claire paused at the door, her back to Emma. "I'll be fine," she replied, her voice steady, though Emma could tell she was lying. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" With that, Claire stepped out of the room, leaving Emma alone once again. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air like a thick fog. Emma didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that everything had changed. She had played her part, and now she would have to live with the consequences. As the night stretched on, Emma found herself standing by the window once again, staring out at the dark sky. She had come so far, but the end of this story was nowhere in sight. The morning after Claire's departure, the mansion felt eerily quiet. The usual sounds of servants moving through the halls, preparing for the day, were absent. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was coming next. Emma, still reeling from the events of the previous night, moved through her chores with a sense of detachment. She had always been able to remain focused on her work, but today, everything felt different. The weight of the secrets she had uncovered pressed heavily on her. She couldn't help but wonder about Claire's future. What would happen to her now? Would Edward finally confront her, or was this just the beginning of an even bigger storm? As Emma passed by the grand staircase, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Edward, his face as unreadable as ever, but there was something in his eyes that made her pause. "Emma," he said, his voice low. "Come with me. I need to speak with you." Her heart skipped a beat. She had a feeling that today would change everything. As they walked down the hall, the silence between them was thick. Edward didn't speak, and Emma didn't dare break it. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew that whatever it was, it would not be easy. When they reached his office, he motioned for her to sit. She complied, her heart racing. "I'm sure you have questions," Edward began, his eyes meeting hers. "About last night, about Claire, and about what happens next." Emma nodded, unable to find her voice. She had so many questions, but now that she was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready to hear the answers. Edward took a deep breath before continuing. "Claire's leaving was a difficult decision, but it was necessary. I can't have someone around who isn't trustworthy. You've seen for yourself what she's capable of." His voice was cold, and Emma couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for Claire, despite everything. "But what about you, Mr. Collins?" Emma asked, finding her voice at last. "What happens to you now? What will you do?" Edward's expression softened for a moment, a flicker of something vulnerable crossing his features. But just as quickly, it was replaced by his usual, controlled demeanor. "I'll move on," he said, his voice steady. "There's no other choice. But I want to thank you, Emma. You've been a trusted member of this household, and I know I can rely on you in the future." Emma was taken aback. She had always seen herself as just another member of the staff, someone who cleaned the mansion and kept to herself. But now, Edward was treating her as if she were something more. "Thank you, sir," she replied quietly. She wasn't sure what to make of his words, but she didn't want to question them. "I'm going to need your help with something," Edward continued, his tone serious. "There are things to be handled, both with Claire and with the business. I trust you, and I need you to be prepared." Emma nodded again, her mind racing. What was he asking of her? She had no idea, but she knew that whatever it was, it would change everything once again. As Edward stood and walked toward the window, Emma sat back in her chair, still processing what he had said. She had never imagined that her life would become so intertwined with the secrets of this powerful man. But now, it seemed there was no way out. She had already seen too much. She had already played a part in uncovering the truth. And now, she had no choice but to follow wherever this path led. As the minutes passed in silence, Emma couldn't help but wonder what the future would bring. Would she become a part of Edward's world, helping him clean up the mess that Claire had left behind? Or would she eventually find a way to leave, to escape the chaos she had become entangled in? For now, she had no answers. Only time would tell what role she would play in the days to come. And as she left Edward's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something much bigger than she had ever imagined.